gotten to the point in our history, we're still in prehistory. In other words, what did I say that, what's required for it to be history? Has to be written down. So we're still in prehistory. People haven't learned to write yet. Or if they did write, it got lost in the flood. So, you know, I'm sure Adam and Eve knew how to write if they ever figured that would be important, because they knew lots of things that we don't know. But all that got lost in the flood. So we have Noah now. The flood is over. The world has changed. It's not one big continent. Now it's 7 continents. It's not one ocean. It's 4 oceans. So you have a lot. The world is different, and the ark had landed on Mount Ararat, and Noah left, as you saw in the movie we looked at. Noah came out of the ark with his family, and they settled in the area there for a while. But they didn't stay in the area. First of all, you saw what the area was like up there. It was very rocky, and the ground wasn't really good for growing a lot of things. So the family slowly moved to a better area. Now, one of the things that I'm going to get you to do is we're going to make a couple of maps this time. That's going to be your next assignment. So Noah and his family came down from the ark. They settled in the area, and they showed you that one of the towns was named after the place where Noah had his vineyards. He first started growing grapes there, and of course he made wine out of the grapes. And he didn't realize how strong his wine was, and when he drank it, he got drunk. And one of his sons, he had 3 sons, remember, is Shem, often pronounced Ham, Japheth, and Shem. And Ham made fun of his father because his father drunk, and he passed out and went to sleep on the floor, and he made fun of him. But Japheth and Shem, they had more respect for their father, and they covered him up. And when Noah woke up, heard what had happened, he was very upset with his son Ham, and he cursed him. He told him that and said he wouldn't give him his blessing. He gave his blessing to Sem and Japheth, and he said that Ham's children would end up being the servants of his brother's children. So as the family got larger, they moved away from that area, and they looked for new areas. And I'm going to show you a map. This is going to be a map that you're going to have to color. So this is a map of the area. So up here in the corner, you'll see here's Mount Ararat with the ark sitting on it. So they come out of here. If you look from this area, this is mountainous area. The nearest area that's pretty flat is this area here. This is a river valley. There's actually 2 rivers that flow through here, the Tigris and the Euphrates. And those rivers, when they arrived in this area over here, they began to spread out and plant, and ultimately their family would move all the way down the valley and take over this whole area. But all of Noah's children had large families. I have a list of all of their kids. And let's see, Japheth had 7 sons. Shem had noteworthy 5, but he had more than that. And Ham had 4. And then the grandsons, one of the grandsons had like 14 kids and whatever. But so they had very large families, and of course, as their families spread out, they began to cover this whole river valley, take up all the land that was there, because that's really is the only fertile land in that whole area. If I'll show you this map again. See, this is the river valley. It goes down into the Persian Gulf. And this is a huge desert. It's one of the worst deserts in the world. A lot of people think that the Sahara is the worst. No, the Sahara is large, but this is a worse desert than even the Sahara Desert. The Sahara is huge, and therefore so it's bad in that way. But this one is very alkaline. It has a lot of poison, animals that are poisonous, snakes and vipers. It's very rocky, very hard to travel. It's desert, but very rocky desert with places you can easily fall and break an ankle. But so this area takes up this whole area inside here. So the only area that is green where you can plant stuff is here and along the seacoast here. And this is called the Fertile Crescent. It's actually an upside down crescent. It runs from here to here. All this area in between, in the center of that crescent, is no man's land. When you travel from here, so let's say to Egypt, you have to go all the way up here and come all the way down. Nobody goes across. Nobody goes across. You're asking to die if you want to go across. And the other area that we're going to talk about where civilization blossomed is this area too, because again, the Nile River. Rivers were important because they needed it. This area, all this area here is very arid and dry. And so if you want to grow crops, you need water. And these are the only rivers, major rivers in the area. Yes, there is the Jordan here, and that's why this area also is fertile. So this is the fertile area, the Palestine, Israel now, up here, down this side. What is now Iraq, Iran, Syria, Palestine, and Egypt. Like that. Even still, nobody lives here. Nobody wants to live there. Even with all modern ways of it's possible that they may have put roads in over it, but I'm not sure. I have to check recent maps, but I doubt it. That's really very inhospitable area. So, so the family spread out mostly down the Tigris and Euphrates River Valley, and they were very well protected on one side by the desert, on the other side by mountains, and on the south by the Gulf of the Persian Gulf. And they began to build as they increased. They began to build cities, towns. Here, to be protected from animals, wild animals, or they lived in the town and they would go out to the fields. They didn't, like you live on your land, you live on your land here, and you farm your land here. They didn't do that. They lived together and they went out to their lands. And they would come back in at night because they felt protected to be together as a family. And we're talking about several generations of family. Remember, people are still living to good ages at this point. So they found that, and this area they called Sennar. It would later be called Samaria. And it was very fertile because of the two rivers. They quickly learned how to use the rivers to their advantage, both to transport things up and down it, but also to make channels and canals to bring the water to their fields. And they developed irrigation. The Nile have that problem. Nile had a regular flood every year, and that's what irrigated their fields. But the Tigris and Euphrates, they had to build channels to divert the water to their fields. And they got to a point where they were building. They also learned how to. There was no rocks. There were mountains over there, but they would have to go over to the mountains, farm, cut the rocks, haul them back to build their houses. So they learned how to make bricks out of mud. And they actually they would make molds so that they could make lots of bricks at one time and bake them and build their houses and their walls and their cities out of bricks, not out of stone, out of bricks. And they began building the big buildings that they built. We call them ziggurats, and they look like stepped pyramids. I'll show you. I have a picture here. All right, so this is the pyramid that you normally see, like in Egypt, with the flat sides. That was a later development. At first, they built them all like this one here, in steps. It's a stepped pyramid. And in where we're talking about now, they built them like this with huge stairways that led up from one level to the other. And on those platforms or the stairways, they would put plants, potted plants, and it was called, they were called hanging gardens, because the plants would like flow over the sides of the step and look like the whole thing was one big huge garden with different layers to it. And so they built these huge buildings, and they decided, after they started building the steps, they said, well, how high can we build this? Let's build one that goes all the way up to heaven. I was kind of proud on their part. So they decided to build a building that would go that tall. And we have evidence. We know pretty much exactly where that building is. There's nothing left of it except the foundation. And it was a big foundation. So they originally built a very big building. But they never finished it. It's obvious that the building was never finished. Why? Does anybody know why they never finished it? You've heard this story. Yes?
Because God changed their languages so they couldn't understand each other.
So they couldn't understand each other. God said, you're too proud, and I don't want you all to be in one place. I want you to spread out over the whole world. So you're kind of disobeying me, so I'm going to make you spread out. And he changed the language of each family. He changed to something different, so that we couldn't work together building. Because the foreman would say, I want you to do that, and they said, well, I have no idea what you just said. And they began to fight about it. Yes?
In any way, if they tried to reach heaven, they'd have to pass outer space, which is impossible if you don't have a spacesuit.
Yeah, but they didn't even get that high. God just said, you're being arrogant, you're being proud, and this isn't going to work. I'm going to punish you. And he did. He changed their language, and they could talk to each other. And so family groups just began spreading out. And they spread everywhere. Here's a map of Noah's children and his grandchildren and where they went. So there's for example, his son Ham had, I think he had 4 kids. And where's my list? He had 4 kids. And Phut, one of his children's names were Cush, Mesrim, Phut, and Canaan. Well, Phut went over here all across North Africa, down into Africa. When he got to the other coast of Africa, he went across the Atlantic, built a raft, went across the Atlantic into Mexico, down into South America. His son Canaan settled in the area that was Canaan, later became called Canaan. And where did he go? He went up. Cush went here. He went over into what is Persia, and again, they were not. They were not. They'd spent. Their family had spent a long time on an ark. They were not afraid of water. So like this, I mean, this guy's going to go across on a raft. This guy builds boats, and he goes down into the South Sea Islands here, and all the way up to Japan, where another one of his sons went down, island hopped all the way down through Indonesia into Australia. The Aborigines in Australia are related. How do we know this? Well, now you can trace your DNA. But also we know from language. They're called, people study languages and see how languages develop, and they can trace how a language traveled. And again, remember, this all started with languages. And so Japheth's sons, he had one of his sons was called Gomer, and his sons, the green ones that went up. Gomer's kids were the ones that went up here. They were the relatives of most of the French, the Celts, the Scandinavians, the Vikings, that sort of group, and even coming across the Atlantic into Canada, that area there. Another one of his great-grandsons, Ascaris, he was the forerunner of the group, again, seafaring people that went up to Britain, northern Africa, forerunners of the Moors. And so you have this is how they all spread out. His son Magog, his grandsons went up into Russia, into that part. Another one of his, I think it's Javan, Javan's sons, went into more like China and that area. But they all traveled out. One of the assignments I'm going to give you is, I'm going to give you a map like this, and I want you to find out where your own ancestors went. Which of your ancestors, which one are you related to? Well, if you're Italian ancestor, which are the ones settled in Italy? And you can use this map to find out. And so, which one did settle in Italy? He's the dark green one. That's Gomer. So, and trace the way your family went. Now, I don't mean your own immediate family. Your families came over probably from Europe, unless you're have Indian, Native American Indian in your background. You came over from Europe. That's a whole different thing. I'm talking about how did your Italian ancestors, your Irish ancestors, your Spanish ancestors, your German ancestors, where did they come from? They came from one of Noah's sons or grandsons. And I want you to find it out. And just trace it on the map. Just mark it on the map. And we're going to keep this for your journal as well. The other thing, your other assignment is you're going to have to color. You'll get a map like this, and you have to color this. You're going to use this map often for a while. You can color the water areas blue, the deserts brown, the mountains gray, the fertile areas green, whatever. So, but anyway, we're going to use this for a while as you're learning about the early civilizations. And later also when we get into more the conquests of the Assyrian empires and the Babylonian empires and those kind of things. So, so as I say, they built these kind of buildings. They're called ziggurats, these step pyramids. But you can tell that how they spread around the whole world, because there is no place in the world that you will not find a pyramid. Some of these pyramids, this one is from Iran. This one is from Egypt. This one's also from Egypt, and this is Iraq. However, this one is in Africa. This one is in China. Yeah, a pyramid in China. Yeah, a number of places in China have pyramids. This one's in Mexico. This is all over the place in Mexico. The Nicaragua, the areas down there. There's plenty of pyramids throughout through the Central American area there. This another one from China. This was in Indonesia. This one is in Cambodia. This one again is from Mexico. So they're all over the world. The same style of architecture. Why? Because that's the way they started out. And they got passed down. And where these people traveled, they took that information with them. And they built what they knew. Later they would build other things, but they built what they knew. So, the Lord scattered them from all over the lands. The city and the name of the city, the name of the tower was called Babel, because it means confusion, and that city was called Babylon, after the city of Babel. And
what does Babylon mean?
Huh?
What does Babylon mean?
Babylon means the land of Babel, or the place where Babel is, or the town of
the land of confusion.
The land of confusion, yes, where it all started. So the 5 sons of Shem settled Persia, Syria, Asia Minor, Mesopotamia. Japheth's sons went more north, and they into Greece, and also into Russia and the other areas up like that. Ham's sons settled in Canaan and Ethiopia and Egypt. And as I say, none of them ever stopped there. They all kept going. The children of Phut, who was the son of Ham, went to Egypt and northern Africa, and they became later known as the Moors, the people who settled in northern Africa. And they moved up into Spain later too. Some of them built rafts and boats and crossed the Atlantic to Mexico and South America. And the descendants of Cush, they went to India, Saudi Arabia, as well as Africa, Southeast Asia, and even Australia. So, as I say, they went everywhere. What about the North American Indians? They got their a mixture of lots of different sons, because as I say, you had them crossing the Atlantic this way. You also had Magog's people coming across the Bering Strait and coming down that way. You have the group that went into China crossing over. So they're quite a mixed group, the Native American Indians. So again, they traveled over the whole world, even the islands in the Pacific. Now, as I say, the valley where the 2 rivers are is called the part of the Fertile Crescent. It's also called Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia means the land between the rivers. And it was, as I said, the only fertile area beyond the desert. So in order to go anywhere, you had to follow the rivers up to the top and then come down the seacoast. Not everybody left. There were people who still stayed in the river valley, and they began to form their own cities, separated from one another. We call these city-states. Each city had its own ruler, probably of the patriarch of that branch of the family. And they made rules for their towns and their cities as they got larger. And so they had individual, what we call city-states. A state, but in other words, a country that has centered in one city. And the government is in that one city. So pretty soon all the city-states in the south became united under under one leader. His name is Sargon the First, Sargon the Great. I'm getting ahead of myself here. So, again, they lived in the cities because, first of all, and went out to their fields because not only first because of animals, wild animals out there, but also because later these cities began to fight each other, and there would be bandits. Not everybody stays good, and some people thought it's easier to steal than to go out and make a living. So they felt protected by living behind walls. And so they stayed inside their cities and towns at night and went out and worked the fields in the daytime. The people who lived in the northern cities were the descendants of Sem. And little by little, they joined with, they moved more south and joined up with the Sumerians in the south, and they became a mixture of half Sumerian and half Semite. The Sumerians developed many things that helped them to live as farmers, because they were basically farmers. As I said, they built canals to help them with bring the water to their fields. They were the first ones to develop what we call hydraulic farming. That's bringing water to your fields, irrigation. They also developed ways of making bricks quicker. Instead of individual bricks, they made molds and did lots of molds at one time. They used the same sort of thing with textiles too. Women knew how to weave. I mean, Noah's wife knew how to weave, but now they were doing it much faster. They would get the women together and they would have weaving mills. Somebody's going to card the wool. Somebody's going to spin it. Somebody's going to weave it. They actually had developed industries. They had the wheel by this time, and they found that if they turned it sideways, they could make a potter's wheel out of it, and they could make ceramics much faster than individual, the labor of handcrafting each individual vase. They could make a potter's wheel and just throw the clay on there and very quickly shape it into a vase. They also developed two other important things that would help mankind. They developed a form of mathematics based on the number 60. You say, well, why would you? What's so important about 60? What's so important? It's not important if everything's straight. But remember that lots of things are curved, circles. And 60 is important when you're talking about curves. For example, the degrees, there are 360 degrees in a circle. That's 6 times 60. You can break the year down into pretty much 360 days. So they were the first ones to figure this out. They also were the first ones to figure out writing. This is the beginning. They invented writing. At least we haven't found anybody who wrote actual writing before that. Yes, there's picture writing. For example, there's caves in France that go back to prehistoric period where animals are painted on the walls. But that's not the same as writing. Writing is keeping a record. And they knew how to do that. They began doing it. They developed a kind of writing what we called cuneiform. It's small wedges. This is what it looks like. It's just, what they did is they took a stylus or a stick or a piece of bone and it's kind of triangular in shape, and they just stamped it into wet clay. Now you write by drawing a pencil across thing. They would stamp it into wet clay. And so the letter A is 3 up and down stampings and 1 across. And the letter B is 2 across and 1 up and down. And by stamping things, they could form letters and then therefore words. And so then you would end up something like this. You have no idea what that is, but yes, they could read it. They could read it. Actually, we can read it now. It took a long time for people to figure out how to read the writings. The way they actually figured it out was they found, one of these archaeologists found written on a wall on the side of a mountain was a list of emperors. At first he didn't realize they were a list of emperors, but he managed to translate at least that much. And once he realized that this was the list of emperors, and he knew what those emperors, who those emperors were, he could figure out the individual letters. And once they figured out the individual letters, then they could apply that to other forms of writing. So, yeah, they found out how to read this kind of writing. So, another thing that they were very good at was what we call metallurgy. You know what metallurgy is? Now remember, Adam's son, Cain's son, Adam's grandson, Tubal-Cain, was the first one to forge metal. But remember, now, everything starts over with Noah. Things get lost. Maybe they remember how to do some things, but people had to learn it again. The Sumerians learned how to, they had access to copper and to tin. Now, if you know anything about copper, it's a very soft metal, and so is tin. Very soft metals. You can bend copper with your hands. You can bend tin with your hands. They're not hard metals. But first they began using copper to make jewelry, to make decorations, to make, tin cups, copper cups, easy to work with. Just take a hammer and you can bend them. Just keep hammering it. You can bend it and make a cup out of it or something, or a plate. Later they found out again. People remembered, or what was passed down to them, that you could melt it in a high fire, and then you could pour it into a mold. But what happens when you mix tin and copper together? Somebody tried it, and they came up with what's called bronze. Tin is soft, copper is soft, bronze is very hard. And the weapons that the soldiers were using in their battles, they were iron. When the Sumerian people figured out how to make bronze weapons, those were stronger even than the iron ones. So, and we grade the ages of in other words, what period you lived in. You lived in the Iron Age, or the Bronze Age, or the Middle Bronze Age, or the Early Bronze Age, and then you went into whatever the next age is. That's how they marked these periods. So probably the most important things that they did give us was the Cuneiform Writing, and again they stamped it into soft clay, and then they baked the clay. That's why we have so much of their stuff. They baked it, and water wouldn't destroy it now. So these tablets that they would have been passed down, and so that's why we know so much about them. This is the beginning of history here, because you have the beginning of writing. You now have the beginning of history. So. One of their first great ruler was Sargon, He was the first great emperor of history, and he conquered the nations east of his territory and brought under his rule the northern area of Syria and along the coast. So if you were going to look at your map, Sargon, where's the map? Right. Sargon took in the whole river area up here and along the coast. This is the first major empire. Before that, they were all just individual cities. Now he takes the whole thing. After the death of Sargon, the land of Babylon, and that's the land in the south, was conquered by the descendants of Shem, and they set up a whole new rule. And their great king is called Hammurabi. Anybody ever hear about Hammurabi? Hammurabi is noted for one thing: a code of law. It's called the Code of Hammurabi. This is what the code looks like. It's a very tall pillar, and it's carved with Hammurabi at the top, giving the code to his people. And you can't see it, but these are tiny, tiny cuneiform writing all the way around the pillar, all the way top to bottom. These are the laws. Hammurabi wrote everything down, all the laws that the kings who came before him, and any laws that he passed were written down on here, so everybody knew what the law was. And the laws covered commerce, if you stole from somebody. It covered politics. It covered civil law. What happens if you kill somebody. And it was like this: if you do this, this happens. You knew exactly what you were going to be punished. You build a house and it falls down and kills somebody, you are responsible. It's written in the code. You are responsible. You will be executed. You're responsible for the death of the other person. Because you did not build the house properly. If it fell down, you didn't build it properly. So you're responsible. So this is the first code of law, the first written code of law. They were conquered. The Canaanites who conquered the cities of Babylon. Now the Canaanites came in from the coast. They were the children of Canaan, and they settled most of that area over there. They later became conquered Babylon, and they went down even as far as Egypt. And they were the descendants of Ham, and they were also known as the Hittites. The Hittites lived in this area of Turkey up here. That's where they started out. And they were a very warlike people. They tended to like to live by themselves in groups, but they would unite to go to war. And when they united to go to war, they were you couldn't defeat them. Because they had a couple of things that nobody else had. They used iron weapons and chariots. And you're going to find, as you study history, that whenever a group of people comes up with some new invention that gives them an advantage over their enemies, like a new weapon, they take over. They will take over. And that's what the Hittites did. They did not invent chariots. Those came out from the north up here. The people, Magog's group living on the steppes in Russia, domesticated horses and found out that you could harness them to a two-wheeled, something that has two wheels and a fork in the middle of it. You can put a horse on each side of that bar and pull that. Put a basket on top of the area where the two wheels are. You can ride in that and have the horses pull you. Later they learned how to ride the horse, and that all changed. But for now, they were afraid to ride the horses. So until cavalry came in, they used chariots. Somebody would drive the chariot, and somebody else in the chariot would throw the spears or shoot arrows. And you couldn't defeat these guys. They move fast. And so the Hittites conquered huge areas. This is kind of what they looked like. They had very long noses. You know, all the drawings that we have of them, because they like to put their picture on lots of things. Very long noses, almost no forehead, you know, and almost no chin. And they tended to they often had beards, but not mustaches, you know, they just like the beard part. So they conquered most of the land. This is where the Hittites came in. They conquered most of that land down into what we call Palestine today, and they went as far as Egypt, and they tried to take Egypt, and that was their downfall. They spent a lot of time trying to take Egypt, and they ultimately did not succeed, and they were totally wiped out.
How?
Because the Egyptians destroyed them. So there's another group of people we didn't call the Mitanni. They're not important. We just know about them because of, again, from written history. They kind of lived in that area there, overlapping the Hittite Empire and the Assyrian Empire there, and they were constantly being swallowed up by whichever group. So they're not really important. Your major groups here at this time were the Assyrians, who followed the Sumerians, the Hittites, and Egypt. So what about Egypt? Egypt comes to power almost at the same time as the Sumerians. Why? Again, they had a river. Rivers are important. And so the Nile River. The Nile River, unlike the Tigris and Euphrates, the Nile River every year in August and September flooded. Covered all the land, flooded all the land. Left a nice, and then went back into its banks. And why? Well, because if you go to the very top of what they call the source of the river, where it begins in the rainforests in Central Africa. And all the water from the rainforest collects there and comes down the river. Now, the Egyptians and even a lot of other nations constantly tried to find the beginning of the Nile River, but they couldn't do it because of the huge waterfalls that they had to climb. And they just couldn't do it. So Egypt developed along both sides of the river, and it developed two kingdoms, a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. The city of Memphis was the capital of the northern kingdom, and Thebes was the capital of the southern kingdom. And later, both of those kingdoms were united under a pharaoh. They called their kings pharaohs. And Egypt was the major enemy of the Hittites, because again, the Hittites kept coming down there and trying to take Egypt. Because why? The Hittites were, they didn't farm like the Sumerians. They just liked to travel around and plunder. You know, their main goal in life was, let's conquer this city, this town, and plunder it and take it and go somewhere else. They didn't stick around. You will see this later in what we call when the barbarians began overrunning Europe, the Goths and the Visigoths and the Vandals, those groups. Those are the Hittites repeating themselves. Again, history repeats itself. These are the Hittites. They just were a warlike people, and they enjoyed war. And they found that if they, by conquering, they didn't have to work. They could just take. And that's what they did. And Egypt is sitting down there, and Egypt is a very rich country. Let's take it. And they tried. But they did not succeed. Again, to get into Egypt, you have to cross this very small strip of land called the Isthmus of Suez. There's the Mediterranean on the north, there's the Red Sea on the south. You have to cross that. And the Egyptians fortified that very well. The Hittites found it very difficult to get through there. Because that's where the armies of the Egyptians would wait for them. If they could get past that, they might be able to get into Egypt and travel around with their chariots and attack some of the other cities. They had a very hard time getting through there. And so they lost. So what about the Egyptians? Well, the Egyptians at this period of time, they needed to develop, as they were developing, they needed to develop their own culture. Their culture is going to be very different from the Sumerians. Yes, they do have pyramids. They do have ziggurats. They start out with step pyramids, and then they began to cover the sides of them and make them smooth, and became a true pyramid. Again, they brought that architecture over with them when they settled in there. But they didn't stop there. Again, the river flooded the land every year. So they have this problem with, okay, here's the floodwaters, and when the floodwaters go back down, there's this layer of silt all over the place. And you all have property. Where's your boundary lines? They just all disappeared. How do you know where your land ends and his begins? It's a big flat plain. And if you had a wall, it just got washed out. They would put stone markers that would be above rise above the level of the floodwaters. But even still, they had to measure from that marker to the river. And you know, rivers when they flood tend to change their banks a little bit. So they developed another kind of mathematics. Mathematics that would help them figure out boundary lines. They developed geometry and algebra. And so they also built huge temples. They were great builders. They loved to build things. And you look at the pyramids and you look at the temples that they built, they were great at building. Pyramids originally were built as burial places for their great pharaohs, but grave robbers would break into them very easily. You know exactly where the tomb was because, you know, it's huge. So just find a way to get into it, and then you can steal everything. Because the kings, the Egyptian kings had this practice that when they died, they wanted to take everything with them. And I mean everything. They had a boat, the boat got buried with them. In front of the temple of Khufu, they unearthed a 150-foot long boat that belonged to him. It was in pieces, but you know. They took everything with them because they thought they would need it in the next life. So let's take everything that we might need. And so these grave robbers would break into the tombs and take all this stuff, all their jewelry, all their gold, anything that was in there. Later, the pharaohs got a little bit smarter. They stopped making huge tombs and they began making secret ones to try to hide them from the grave robbers. But grave robbers were still pretty good. We've only found a couple of intact tombs of pharaohs. The only one that was the most notable one was the tomb of Tutankhamun. And they had broken into it, but somehow gotten and began moving all this stuff together to get it out, and then something happened, and they never went back. Maybe the guy who had found it died or got killed, and the other guys didn't know how to get there.
He died.
Yeah, and so they just so when Carter discovered the tomb, it still had all of its stuff in it. But that's unusual. Most of the time it got stolen and remade into something else. The Egyptians also developed a form of writing. They actually developed two forms of writings. One was hieroglyphics, which looks like pictures, but it's not really picture writing. In other words, picture writing is, let's say you draw a house, and you would say that drawing of the house means house. Hieroglyphics is, let's say they drew a house, and then they say that stands for the letter H, because it starts with the sound of the H. And then, so they had a pretty elaborate alphabet. In fact, and it took a lot of time to write anything, because you have all these drawings. It's not just like the cuneiform where you're stamping triangles. No, you have to draw a bird. Now you have to draw the house, and these are just two letters. Now you have to. So the hieroglyphics was used mostly for very fancy work, like in temples and in tombs. They developed a second form of writing that they could do much faster. It was called Demotic, not demonic, but Demotic. And it kind of looks like Arabic writing today. It's along that line, a lot of squiggles and things like that. So they developed two, and that was their normal writing. That was the writing was used most of the time. The archaeologists had trouble understanding either type of writing until during the time of Napoleon, when Napoleon invaded Egypt and was stealing as many things as he could. One of his soldiers came across a stone. Looks like that. And the stone has three divisions on it. There's three types of writing on that stone. This is called the Rosetta Stone. There's three types of writing: Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphics. And they all tell the same thing. When somebody figured that out, that they were all talking about exactly the same thing, they could then use it to translate. All right, so this is the story in hieroglyphics. This is the story in Demotic. This is the story in Greek. Hey, we know Greek, so we can translate the Demotic and the hieroglyphics now. So, but it took a while for somebody to figure that out. So it's a big slab of granite, and it's famous because it helped us understand and be able to translate hieroglyphics and both in the Demotic language. So now archaeologists are able to read the things that are written in the tombs, and now we can understand the history of Egypt. Now, I haven't covered the whole history of Egypt. This is just the part called the Old Kingdom, because we're going to cover as we cover what's going on in one area, the Fertile Crescent. We'll also see what's going on in Egypt, so that. Yes, I could go through the whole history of Egypt, but then it would confuse you when we have to say, okay, now we have to go back and, this whole area here is important because, again, this is where civilization began. Fertile Crescent is the birthplace of civilization. It all started there because that's where the children of Noah settled. So for the next time, your assignment is to color the maps, and I can give somebody the maps and they can make photocopies for you. So you're going to color this map. Now, if you want to get really elaborate and maybe soak it in coffee or diluted coffee or tea and make it look old, I don't have a problem with that, but I'm not asking you to do that. That's entirely up to you. I know it's the kind of thing I would do when I was your age, but yeah, I know definitely not everybody. Everybody's not into that kind of thing. But it will ultimately go in your journal. So you want it to look nice. You are going to use this quite a bit. So take your time. What can you color it with? I don't care. You can use chalk. Of course, if you use chalk, you have to spray it with hairspray or something to fix the chalk on it, or it won't come right off. You can use watercolors, you can use markers, you can use colored pencils. Highly recommend colored pencils or crayons. Yes?
What journal are you meaning? Because me and Nathaniel, we have journals, just they can't fit pages that big in them.
The one you're going to make can. Yes. I'm going to bring in some old encyclopedias, and you're going to use the cover of those encyclopedias to make your journal. So your journal will be this big. Actually, a little bigger. So it will fit.
So when you say color it, what do you want them to color?
I want them to color the areas that are water blue, the areas that are desert tan or brown, or the mountains, you can make them gray or whatever. Just the fertile areas green. So just so that it looks nice. Now you'll notice there's other little drawings on here. There's a boat. Of course, there's the ark up there. There's a guy on a camel here. You can color them or not. I don't care. If you want to color them and make them look even better, that's up to you too. Then the other assignment is that I want you to try and figure out where your family came from. And you can use this map. I'll put all this up on the website that you can have a PDF of it too, but this is kind of small. It's hard to read. This is what you call a legend. A legend tells you how to read the map. So what it means, it says here that the children of Shem are all these red ones here. The first one is Phut. He's the dark red. That's this one. So this is the legend. Each of these are the grandchildren or children or grandchildren, and these are of Japheth, the greenish bluish ones over here. He had a lot of kids. They had a lot more kids on there than Ham had. And then by following those colors, you can see which of those children went where. So let's say your great-grandmother is German. So where did the Germans come from? Well, they're going to be one of these green ones in here. So you find that person, and you trace their line from the Middle East. Notice they all start here in the center. This is Babylon. And they will go out from there in all directions. So you find which one yours is, and then you transfer those lines to this map. You can do them with just a plain pen, so that you know, and you can mark up here, that maybe you found that you're 2 or 3 lines. Maybe some of your relatives are from Gomer, and some of them are from Fat. So you mark 2 different colored lines, and you make your own little legend somewhere on here, up here or down here, or in the margin.
What's that long green thing by North America?
That's a sea monster. You have, let's see, you have a whale over here. You have a ship in the middle. This is to make it look like an old map. This is Poseidon over here, Greek. And there's, of course, here's the north, south, east, and west compass. And yes, up here at the top is a sea monster. Sea monsters exist? Yes, they do. Yes, they actually do. How about the Loch Ness monster? That's a dinosaur that got closed in after the flood and locked inside the lake. There's one in Lake Champlain in New York. They call him Champy. Again, it's a dinosaur, a water dinosaur that got locked into when the waters receded from the flood, got left behind. Can't get out now. Regularly, people will find dead bodies of these things on the shores of like Africa or South America, washed up because they died and got in a storm or run over by a ship or whatever, and end up being found on the shore. And they can't explain what this thing is. Yeah, remember, in the flood, the water animals were not affected. And Noah did take dinosaurs with him on the ark, the land ones. Yes, he did take dinosaurs with him on the ark. No, they were little ones. They were babies or young ones, They weren't the huge, gigantic ones. They would grow that way after they got off the ark. They only had to spend 1 year on the ark. Then he let them go and they could get as big as they wanted, So there were some dinosaurs on the ark. And they later became known as dragons. And how did they get, how come we don't have any today? First of all, they were a menace and people killed them. That's why we have St. George. Even still around the Middle Ages, you had them every once in a while showing up. People would kill them. Early on, Noah's trying to plant fields and the dinosaur just ran across the field and destroyed everything. Okay, hey, this is meat for a year. Let's go get it. People killed them. They became extinct because people killed them over a long period of time. So yes, a lot of them died during the flood. A majority of them did die during the flood. But there were a few on the ark, just like there were a few of the other animals who survived. So, any questions? Yes.
When you were talking about the city-states in Turkey coming down and trying to take over Egypt, was that before or after the Hyksos invaded Egypt?
This would be before it. Yes, much before it. We'll get to them later. The Hyksos. Yeah, we'll get to them later. These are just, right now, Egypt is just, it's in its early stages, what we call the Akkadians, and then later this is called the Old Kingdom. And later they'll have a Middle Kingdom and a New Kingdom. But this is the beginnings of history in Egypt. And so they're just starting everything. Egypt, again, because it's a very rich country, ends up being taken over by lots of different peoples at different times. There are a lot of power struggles. In any area, you're going to find this. Again, history repeats itself. Somebody will come up with a new weapon that gives them power. What do they do with it? They attack their enemies, their neighbors. We want that. We want whatever they got. We'll take it. Another thing that happens regularly is, all right, so the guy with the new weapon goes in and takes over this area, and he maybe doesn't stick around, comes back out like the Hittites. Now with what they call a power vacuum, or that ruler dies. There's a power vacuum. Everybody tries to go in and take over. That's the other thing that happens. You'll see this often, and this does happen regularly in Egypt. Power vacuums, where the major rulers die, there's a major upset in the government, everybody wants the power, they move in from other areas and try to take it. So these are regular cycles, and you'll see this over and over again in history, because history repeats itself. Human nature doesn't change. Human nature doesn't change. People still want money, power. Wars are fought for three major things. Wars are fought for power. They're fought for land, which is the same as money. Early on, land is more important than money. Later, money becomes more important than land, but land is money. So power, money, religion. Those are the three things. All wars come down to one of those three things. Somebody wants power. Somebody wants to be rich in some way, shape, or form. Or my religion is the only religion and you have to follow it. Money, power, religion. Those are the three things. Every war comes down to one of those things. And you will see this over and over again. Not a lot fought over religions. It's mostly over land, and which is power. The land can be the power, the land can be money. It works either way. But you still have a lot of wars that are fought because of religion.